people are first introduced to the possibility of Planet X, they want proof, and not from some wild-eyed lunatic. They want it from a reliable source, and rightfully so. To demonstrate this proof, we first need to understand how astronomers actually discovered the outer planets in our solar system. The search for Planet X actually began when early astronomers first observed perturbations in the orbit of Saturn. Through mathematics, they predicted the existence of Saturn's perturber. William Herschel, a German-born British astronomer, then used this mathematical prediction to discover the planet Uranus in 1781. Interestingly enough, astronomers soon found perturbations in the orbit of Uranus as well. Based on the perturbations observed in the orbit of Uranus, a brilliant young 19th century British mathematician and astronomer by the name of John Couch Adams mathematically predicted the existence and position of a massive object in the outer solar system, one he believed was large enough to be Uranus's perturber. Then, German astronomer John Gall used Adams' mathematical prediction to discover the planet Neptune in 1846, and as with Uranus, astronomers would then find perturbations in the orbit of Neptune as well. Consequently, the search for Planet X was far from over. When Clyde Tombaugh discovered the planet Pluto in 1930, many jumped to the conclusion that it was the mysterious Planet X that everyone had been looking for so long. However, when the mathematicians began running the numbers, it became quickly obvious that Pluto had nowhere near the mass to be Neptune's perturber. When you compare Pluto with the Earth, the math becomes self-evident. Here you see Pluto and the Earth. Pluto seems tiny because it is tiny. In fact, it's roughly 60% the size of our own moon. This is why Pluto was recently demoted to the status of a dwarf planet. Oh well, fame is fleeting, so let's refocus our attention on the critical point, which is the ongoing search for this elusive Planet X. In the spirit of Herschel, Adams, Gall, and Tombaugh, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, continued the search for Planet X, and in 1992 they issued a landmark press release. It said, "Unexplained deviations in the orbits of Uranus and Neptune point to a large outer solar system body of 4 to 8 Earth masses on a highly tilted orbit beyond 7 billion miles from the Sun." After this announcement, the whole topic of Planet X mysteriously disappeared from the media spotlight. And this takes us back to the 1984 U.S. News article stating that NASA's Infrared Astronomical Satellite, IRAS, detected an object of intense speculation in 1983. Could this be the same object they reported in 1992 as being 7 billion miles from the Sun and as massive as 8 Earths? Given NASA's silence on the matter, who is to say? But then again, this silence does beg the question, what did they see and what did it look like? Perhaps a good guess starts with the IRAS itself. When we use amateur telescopes and binoculars in our backyards to view the heavens, we're looking at the skies in the visible light spectrums. However, as the name implies, the Infrared Astronomical Satellite, or IRAS for short, was used to view the heavens in the infrared spectrum. Our military and paramilitary forces use infrared devices for surveillance and to target the bad guys at night. This is because infrared devices show us the heat signatures of objects, such as the engine in this jet fighter. Likewise, astronomers use infrared telescopes to penetrate the dusty regions of space where it is difficult for us to observe cool, distant objects. With this in mind, let's assume that IRAS imaged Planet X in 1983. If so, what might it have looked like? Assuming it was spotted, it may have appeared like this, a faint reddish object. So what could that be? In 1984, astronomers felt it could be one of two things: a massive protoplanet forming at the edge of our solar system, or a brown dwarf companion to our own Sun. While a protoplanet would obviously lack the mass to perturb the orbits of Uranus and Neptune, A brown dwarf certainly would. So then what is a brown dwarf? In simple terms, a brown dwarf is an unborn star, and astronomers have recently learned that these unborn stars are the most common type in our galaxy. Unlike our sun, which has the necessary mass to keep its own nuclear furnace burning, brown dwarfs lack the mass needed to stay lit. Consequently, they ignite much like our own sun did, then sputter out and slowly die like the hot embers of a campfire. This is one reason why brown dwarfs are difficult to view in the visible light spectrums, because they're shrouded by a large ball of dust created by their initial ignition. However, a brown dwarf would stand out to the IRAS like a sore thumb due to its heat bloom. That's why infrared telescopes are ideal Planet X trackers at this time. So assuming that Planet X is a brown dwarf, how big could it be? The prevailing thought on brown dwarfs is that they must be bigger than the planet Jupiter, although astronomers have recently discovered a gas giant in another solar system that is substantially larger than Jupiter. Nonetheless, the assumption here is that if Jupiter were any larger, it could ignite and become a sun. An idea that was brilliantly examined in the film 2010, The Year We Make Contact, starring Roy Schneider, John Lithgow, and Helen Mirren. Released in 1984, it was the long-awaited sequel to Stanley Kubrick's 1968 blockbuster 2001, A Space Odyssey. What's interesting to note about the movie 2010 is the closing scene. In that scene, we see two suns in the sky. Assuming that Planet X is a brown dwarf, is it possible that reality could mimic fiction and that we actually see two suns in the next 5 years? Yes, we could, if Planet X actually enters the core of our solar system. If you're sensing that the other shoe is about to fall, your instincts are spot on. According to a story titled Planet X, Is It Really Out There?, published in the September 10, 1984 issue of U.S. News and World Report, in 1983, the infrared astronomical satellite IRAS detected heat from an object about 50 billion miles away. Then in 1992, NASA issued a press release in which they state that they found an object of 4 to 8 Earth masses on a highly tilted orbit beyond 7 billion miles from the Sun. If this indeed is the very same object, the numbers say it all. This monster is headed our way. That is, assuming this object is in a long elliptical orbit around our own Sun. That brings us to the crux of the matter. And with this in mind, let's assume the following 3 things. 1. Planet X is an old, unborn companion to our own Sun. 2. It is in a long elliptical orbit around our Sun. And 3. It is returning to pass through the core of our solar system, which explains our recent solar violence, global warming, and ongoing Earth changes. Assuming all of this is true, it stands to reason that there would be documented history of a previous Planet X flyby. Yes, there is. After you look at the scientific proof, the historical proof begins to leap out at you in completely new ways. A good example of this new context can be found with Jeremiah, a prophet from the Old Testament. He felt compelled to warn us of something he called the destroyer, and he clearly foresaw how the entire earth would suffer its wrath. In Jeremiah 25:32 and 48:8 we read, "Disasters will soon spread from nation to nation. They will come like a powerful storm to all the faraway places on earth." Here, Jeremiah clearly warns us that this future cataclysm will beset us on a global scale. He goes on to say, "The destroyer will come against every town. Not one town will escape. The Lord said this will happen." Here, Jeremiah identifies the global cataclysm as being caused by something he refers to as the destroyer. So, are there any similar ancient texts from this same period of time that give us the same exact wording? Yes, there is. For this we go back to the Exodus, which was as much a blessing for the Hebrews as it was a terrible curse for the Egyptians. In the aftermath of Exodus, the Egyptians had lost their faith. Their own pantheon of gods had proven impotent before the powers of the Hebrew God. Just as we felt compelled to understand why 9/11 caught us so unawares, the Egyptians needed to understand what happened to them as well. So as the Hebrews began to write the Old Testament, the Egyptians simultaneously penned a massive anthology called the Great Book. The original text was written in ancient Hieratic and was later translated into Phoenician and then on into English. In its original form, the Great Book was the size of a modern encyclopedia, and it offered very precise historical accounts. Two such notable accounts were Noah's flood, or the deluge as it is more commonly known across the four corners of the earth. In the Egyptian account of Sesuda and Hanok, they described an ark very similar to the one built by Noah, and in much the same manner. Then there are the Egyptian accounts of the 10 plagues of Exodus. It is important to keep in mind their version was written by the vanquished, as opposed to the Old Testament account, which was written by the victorious Hebrews. There are many similarities between the two. For example, neither the Hebrews nor the Egyptians mention the actual name of the Pharaoh of Exodus. However, where they differ, and strikingly so, is in what actually caused the 10 plagues of Exodus. According to the ancient Egyptians, what caused the 10 plagues of Exodus was a massive object. They also tell us this same object caused Noah's flood and the destruction of Atlantis as well. Like the Hebrew prophet Jeremiah, they too called it the destroyer and have warned us of its return. In fact, the ancient Egyptians go to great length to warn us that Jeremiah's destroyer will return with catastrophic consequences for all of the earth and those who live upon it, and in these days. What remains of these ancient Egyptian historical accounts are contained within the first 6 books of the Kolbrin Bible, and they corroborate similar accounts in the Hebrew Torah, or the Old Testament as it is referred to by Christians. Scientifically accurate, these ancient Egyptian accounts read as easily as man-on-the-street TV interviews. This is why noted Planet X historian Greg Jenner says that the Kolbrin Bible is the Rosetta Stone of Planet X. This is because the Egyptian accounts are so prescient they unlock many Planet X secrets buried within the Holy Bible and numerous other ancient texts and folklore. Many of the harbinger signs of the destroyer's return mentioned within the Kolbrin Bible have already come to pass, and it is warning us that what will come will be Jeremiah's destroyer. The Kolbrin Bible gives us many examples of what this is going to be like. The most notable comes from the Book of Manuscripts. When blood drops upon the earth, the destroyer will appear, and mountains will open up and belch forth fire and ashes. Trees will be destroyed, and all living things engulfed. Waters will be swallowed up by the land, and seas will boil. Assuming our governments know all this, what are they doing about it? And of course, we want to know what's going to happen to us. Well, our governments have known about it for a long time, and yes, they're doing plenty about it. The question is, what are you doing about it? Once this all begins to sink in, it can take your breath away, and so the first question we often ask ourselves is, am I nuts? Am I just seeing things? For those who feel this way, you're not nuts, and you're not seeing things. What's happening is that the blinders are coming off. When that happens, the first thing we all see is the realization that in 2012, Americans will be burying their dead as their forefathers did during the American Civil War. By the thousands, by the tens of thousands.